So thank you for coming back if this is your second time at the Christian Culture Conference or more. Hopefully we'll see many of you that are students at our college. It's great to be here with all of you. I also had the privilege of welcoming our next speaker to the Board of Regents. He's our newest member of the Board of Regents as of Monday. We're blessed to have him. Dr. Yenor asked the first night if his speech should be serious or should be entertaining and funny. And I didn't say entertaining and funny because I wanted to make sure this guy was actually funny. So I've been testing him over the last few days, and unfortunately, his speech today will be very serious. Yeah. But Dr. Yenor is the Senior Director of the State Coalition at the Claremont Institute Center for the American Way of Life. I'm assuming they talk a lot about baseball, maybe apple pie there, but he's also a professor of political science at Boise State University, and the author of, here we go, the long titles, Family Politics, The Idea of Marriage in Modern Political Thought, and The Recovery of Family Life, Exposing the Limits of Modern Ideologies. So please welcome to the stage Dr. Yenor.
But I won't talk the whole time, I don't think. So thank you for having me, and I'm glad to be here. Titles get foisted on authors when they are insignificant people. And when you're a significant person, you can start to demand good names for your title. Like Tolstoy could name his books, War and Peace. And people are like, all right, Leo, give it to Leo. But I'm not Leo Tolstoy. And you'll see that I don't have the beard that everyone else here has, at least not today. So when I first got to know the people here at LCC, we talked a lot about the failures of conservatives and the failures in higher education especially. And the difficulties that conservatives have in higher education, and really a lot of aspects of politics and life and policy, is that they're trying to defend yesterday's stupid innovation against today's stupid innovation and tomorrow's impending corruption. So, no-fault divorce happens, and we're like, well, we have to roll that back. We have to roll that back, but it's like, no, a conservative says that's been, we're going to defend that position now against the next thing that's going to happen. And this really happens in higher education. And it's a very liberating event over the course of your life as you try to peel back the onion and to see the core of the corruption that really plagues higher education. And the title of my talk is Free Speech is Not Enough, and I'm not really going to talk a lot about that. But let me start with that, just so that you think that I actually had a plan when I came in. So today, conservatives on campus defend free speech against today's campus totalitarians. And it makes sense to do that. Today's conservatives defend what we call meritocracy against racial preferences in admissions and hiring. Today's conservatives defend what they call intellectual diversity against the leftist monoculture on campus. Today's conservatives defend real science against the fake and ideological science that so often plagues our institutions. So here we are defending free speech, meritocracy, intellectual diversity, and real science. Is that really where we want to die? On those hills? Are those the things that you can build a college on? Is that the thing that you want to accomplish in higher education? So we're in this dilemma where we're always defending something that isn't really what we want to defend. And free speech or academic freedom, no one talked about that until 1915. No one. Is that the golden age of higher education? Is that the model that we want to derive today's models for reformed higher education from? I don't think so. So the effort that anyone who wants to establish a well-functioning institution of higher education has to do is disenthrall yourself from today's controversies and figure out precisely what we are after when it comes to a good institution. And this is a historical endeavor, but it's also, as I say, very liberating. It's almost the only way you can be free is to think like outside today's cave. Today's higher education cave is a real cave. So I want to do some of that with you today, and it might culminate in a kind of account of what classical education is and what's distinctive about it. But all these things, like many people here have gone to college, right? Many people are college graduates. There are so many aspects of the college or university experience that we take for granted that are novelties when you look at the history of universities. Let's just be very basic about this. College education is broken down almost everywhere between what we call general education and a major, whatever the major is going to be. And your major is going to be in an academic department. None of us have been to a college that basically wasn't organized like this. That is all an innovation. We expect college professors to have PhDs, and we think PhDs are wise. The day I got my PhD, I was over at my dissertation advisor's house, and his daughter, who's now like 35, so really, maybe I shouldn't even think about this, was a little girl dressed as Cinderella, and he said, well, Dr. Yenor here, don't call him Scott anymore, you call him Dr. Yenor. And she's like, oh, he must be smart. And my dissertation advisor said, don't count on it. But we expect everyone to be a PhD. And that's a novelty. I'll get to it in a second. We expect admissions to be standardized across the country with tests to verify your capabilities when you enter the university. Look, that's from the 50s. These are not sacred doctrines that have been around forever and are inextricably linked with universities. These are all part of a very particular understanding of the university that we imported into the country in, between 1880 and 1915. And we're going to call that university the progressive university, right? The expectation that there's going to be general ed, academic departments, PhDs delivering it with special admissions, which are standardized all across the country with tests to verify your capabilities. There's more things to say about this. Each class, you get a grade for that class. That's actually novel. Used to be you'd get an exit exam. The problem with exit exams is people fail them. So we got rid of exit exams. But I don't know that we're reviving those either. And then we think of, many people at least, think of undergraduate education as preparation for professional school. So you can be finished as a lawyer like Micah. He's still a work in progress, but he goes to law school afterward. And then we invent MAs for education and for anthropology and psychology and communications, marketing. I was driven over here by an Uber guy who was getting a PhD in marketing. That's professional school. It's why don't you just market? But anyway. So these are all features of the university that are, I'm going to say, part of the progressive university. And if you think about it, almost all of the ways in which we talk about higher education assume this basic framework will maintain itself. We want to reform what they do in general education. We want to get rid of some of the departments so that they're more serious. We want higher standards to get into school. We want more diversity in the PhDs that are teaching. But all of them assume this basic framework that's 80 years old. And Classical schools are an attempt, like I should say real classical schools, are an attempt to break out of this like straitjacket that the modern university is for education. And they're an attempt to return to education before the progressive university. So like what I'm trying to say here is a variation of what we call the German invasion hypothesis about America. America had its own approach to education. A bunch of people went to Germany and looked at German universities, and they were great. The Berlin University and Bonn and Göttingen, they're all great, like cutting-edge modern universities. They said, we need to be more like that. They came back and built our universities into something different, like they displaced the old colleges with the new modern research university. And there were good reasons to do it, and I want to lay out a couple of those good reasons, is that we do get good things from this new model. We get specialists who are good at chemistry and physics, who can then actually go on and do inventions and make economies better. We can do we have robotic labs, and so the research arm of this university has been very important for progress in technology in the country. And what we've done is put all of these goals, the research university and the remnant of the old college, we keep that around. We call it general education. And it's kind of a backwater. And students approach it as oh, I have to get them out of the way so I can do my real business. But I think the research university is a valuable thing, so I want to return to that in a little bit. But that's what was really bewitching for the people who helped undertake the German invasion and bring it over to America. But let's talk about what the classical model was that they displaced. It was stocked with amateurs. The people did not have PhDs. They're I just really like Latin and history. Can I be a tutor here? And there was quality control, are you good enough? And then you'd have to demonstrate that you're good enough, and then you'd get hired. And if you hired a bunch of schmoes who weren't any good, you'd go out of business. Bummer. But it was not PhDs, it was amateurs who were doing this. There was a set curriculum. That is, everyone basically took 80%, 90% of the same courses throughout the time they were there. And the curriculum wasn't standard at every college, but it was kind of standard at every college. Most of them had Latin as a prerequisite to get in. You had rhetoric, you had logic classes. There was no history department. It was just called letters. Well, you learned history, philosophy, all that, letters. Letters 1, letters 2, letters 3, letters 4. Most of the schools were denominational, so they had a goal in mind. Sometimes it was producing clergy, sometimes teachers, but also lawyers, and each university had distinctives. The colleges were actually quite different from one another. It would be hard to transfer from one to the other. Now, actually think about it. We can transfer easily from one college to another. Why is that? They're all the same. Same departments, same general ed courses. There used to be, I'm not defending diversity, but I'm saying there used to be a diverse range of colleges. Because no one was saying you're doing a good job, you're accredited. It was just can we get students to come? And if we can, we stay open. That's the way it was. Individual colleges had prep schools that were connected to them. So if you wanted to go to Harvard, there were 3 colleges or 3 prep schools that funneled in to Harvard College, and most colleges had the same setup. And in fact, they kind of ran them. They kind of ran if you want to be a Harvard man, you go to this, and you start at 6, and you're done when you're 18. They started when they were 15. They were done by the time they were 20. At almost every college. Each college set their own admission requirements. There was no SAT. There was no high school to show that you had graduated with some kind of basis for knowledge. But these colleges all had the same goal, and this is kind of what I want to kind of emphasize about the colleges. They wanted every student to see themselves as the product of a civilization. The education that they got that culminated in college was in the civilization that they came from. We don't read Confucius. We read the Bible, Plato, Aristotle. That's who we read because they're our civilization. You can maybe learn something from that. If you want to have a classical school in China, read Confucius. In our civilization, for our people, we're going to have books, works of art, works of music that represent our civilization. The languages that were emphasized were our civilized languages that were the root of almost every other kind of branch language. So, there was a specific goal that classical colleges had in mind. I helped run a classical school in Boise, a K-12 classical school, and I always say we have to have a motto so that people know what classical education is in 5 words. And then just repeat it all the time, and then people will recognize it. And we use great questions, Christian answers, or enduring questions and Christian answers. That's what we try to do at this school. We get the great questions from Plato and Aristotle. What's righteousness? What's justice? What's a good city? What's a good life? They all talk about them, they argue about them, and we're going to defend the Christian answer to these questions. That's what we're about. It's not the best definition, but I'm not going to give a disquisition on the topic, but that's what it represents. It doesn't explain why we do languages. Another level of the understanding of what classical education is that we must see ourselves as products of the civilization that produced us. And if we want to understand ourselves, we have to understand that civilization. So you have to know about the Jews, the Gentiles, the Christians, the Romans, the Greeks, the English, the Germans. All of that's important because it made our buildings what they are. It made our music what it is. It made our literature what it is. And that's the product, civilization. That's what classical education is designed to teach us about and to steep us in. The modern university, the German university, is about public service. All right? Now that doesn't mean the classical schools are against service. But the modern research university with its departments and its majors and its PhDs is designed to produce knowledge that helps us conquer nature and control man. So we teach people psychology so we can cure their mental illnesses. We don't want to understand the soul, we want to understand what works to make you better. Anthropology is about digging stuff up and from man's past, and I'll talk about that in a second. So anyways, so these are 2 radically different goals. Understand your civilization or conquer nature and control man. And what Christian denominations have been doing for ever since this German invasion is trying to compromise between these 2 understandings of the university. We're going to break ourselves up into departments. We're only going to hire people who have PhDs. They're going to have knowledge about conquering nature and controlling man. They're not going to be steeped in the civilization that they come from. We hope they have background knowledge so that they can help give a Christian gloss on psychology. But it's never going to be sewn into their professional standards. The professional standards that they are trained in are going to come from outside of Christendom. They're going to come from the German Research University. And, people have been noticing this problem forever, since the Research University began, that reconciling these 2 goals is something's going to give. And over the last 40 years, and maybe especially over the last 5 years or so, it's become obvious which side has won out in this particular compromise. And Christian universities have lost their identity because all of their hiring is of people who have technical knowledge in particular disciplines and not like an education based on the great questions and Christian answers. The questions in for modern academics come from the literature that is progressive and, builds on itself so that we can understand how to conquer nature better and control man better. So, as I say, these are two big-time different versions of education. Now, classical ed isn't that concerned about free speech. It's like not the point. If a school has a mission, it should try to accomplish that mission. Like, we don't want atheism to have equal time with faith. Right? The point is to educate with answers. Meritocracy isn't exactly what a classical school is going to be about. You want people who are aligned with what you're trying to accomplish and care about the mission. That's just as important as ability. And in fact, ability without the other part is not worth having at the college. So the cliches that conservatives rely on when they're criticizing higher education today really are irrelevant to any attempt to recover a non-modern understanding of higher education. Which doesn't mean you shouldn't use those words, but you should only use them cynically in order to help destroy some of the things that have been built recently. So, this could be illustrated in many ways, and I'm sure that everyone who has experience going through higher education could talk about their own war stories. I'm just going to give one quick war story from a discipline that is not my own. I'm a literature fan, love literature. I read ancient, modern, I love novels. I'm always reading one of those. And I think of literature as like philosophy with characters. Like a really good novelist is trying to teach you about human psychology, how men work, how women work, what the aspirations of human beings are. And I just love to see like different opinions about that. I'm a big fan of Tolstoy, a big fan of Dostoevsky. I don't think you can have both, but I try to understand each of them. And I always think that I learn something about other people when I read these books. Like, yeah, she reminds me of Anne Elliot in Persuasion, and that would be good. Or like, you remind me of Smerdyakov in Brothers K. That would be bad. So, I think it's good to do that, and you can just learn tons. And I think, like the way I measure it, English departments on the modern university are the worst departments. Because I judge it by how good you could be and what you are. Like sociology can't be that good, and it's pretty bad. It's like this. But if you measure it by the distance between what you could be and what you are, English is just awful. And why is that? Well, first of all, like they've adopted scientific approaches to reading books, which is to say, like I bring presuppositions to texts. This text, like all texts, is about class conflict. That's what was going on when I took my one and only literature class as an undergraduate. I'm like, man, is this book about class conflict? I don't think it is. So I just stopped and just read on my own. Like, that was better. Today it's gender or race or things like that. They read through lenses, and they call it criticism, higher criticism of the books. Because the perspective that we have today is what we bring to the books. They don't teach us. We teach them, in a sense. And it's really, totally disappointing and ridiculous. And And the number of majors is cratering through English departments. We could talk about history in the same way. So there's a classical approach to literature, which is that this book could teach me about human nature. And then there's a modern university approach to literature that says, I'm going to show how this book reveals the disputes that we have today. And very different. And one is kind of life-changing, and the other might be life-changing for some people, but like they're not the people that are going to, well, they might change the world, but it'll be in a bad way. So, as I say, like, I think these two models are irreconcilable. Today, philosophy departments aren't about wisdom. They're about how can we help science justify itself. That's what they do. It's called analytical philosophy. Almost everyone who's in a philosophy department, that's what they do. And it's like got equations, and it's incomprehensible to other people. But like, we can all read Plato and kind of figure out what's going on. Is he dumber than these guys? No, he's just doing something totally different. He's trying to explain your soul to you. They are trying to justify science. And it's tip-offs to totally different visions of the university. So, what classical education is an attempt to disenthrall ourselves from everything that defines the modern university. Departments, meritocracy, conservative and liberal elements, free speech, and electives, general education as opposed to majors. Like, all of that's gone. There's a set curriculum that reveal the biggest questions, and in our case here at LCC, will reveal Christian answers to those questions. That we're going to steep students in the principles and questions and debates of the civilization. You cannot, and because we believe you cannot understand yourselves unless you look back and see where you came from. And if you think you can understand yourselves without having any heritage behind you, then actually you're not fit for education. But you do well on the modern university. So now, also having been involved in classical ed stuff for a long time, I think there are a couple challenges that classical schools face. And I want to talk about those for just a second. It's kind of become hip, if you can believe that. Classical ed's become hip. And I think it's become hip because we need a word for, like, not those guys. And like, oh, those guys are bad. Well, like, we're classical. And like, it's like classic rock or classical music. And I know that where I'm the chairman of a K through 12 school, not like, people think of it as the Shire. No one at our school is going to actively corrupt your children. That's classical education. We're not going to trans your kids. We're not going to groom your kids. We're not going to actively dishonor God, the family, marriage, the country. We're not going to actively do any of that stuff. You know, we might passively do it. But we're not going to actively do any harm. And people are wearing uniforms. So that means there's discipline. And we take that seriously, and we've really accomplished something. And I'm for all of these things, by the way. I mean, I should say I'm for a school that doesn't trans kids or groom kids. Like, I'm for all of that. But like, it's not enough to hold a college together or a school together. It has to be united by a vision. And which is like one of the lessons of the Shire, right? The Shire, like, exists because there's a war on, and they're protected by those waging the war. And education is going to have elements of that war. And so it's always difficult to balance those who look at the school as a Shire, and it needs to be a Shire, and the need for the school to be engaged in the war that is the battle for the souls of, humanity. I'm always interested to see when people say, like, this time we're going to get it right. This is the second problem with classical education. Like, this time we're going to get it right. My uncle was married 6 times before he died. And when he died, I remember thinking, like, what was he thinking on the 5th marriage? And obviously the answer was, like, she's the one. This time we're going to get it right. And that one fell apart, And so, like, what guarantee or what reassurance can we have that this time we'll get it right? And I think that the answer is that when you understand the conflict between the modern university and the classical university, and you've disenthralled yourself from all of the assumptions of the modern university, you're closer to getting it right. If you look at colleges that have tried to, there's this law about politics, you guys have probably heard it, it's called conquest law, but maybe it's O'Sullivan's law. It's never really know whose law it is, but the law is this: anything that is not explicitly conservative becomes liberal. And even things, and I'd like to add a Yenor addendum to that, which is even things that are explicitly conservative can become liberals, all right? So, like, how do you sow into what you are some guarantee that it's going to last and maintain its vision? When it comes to higher ed, if you attach yourself to departments, like, it's going to be tough over the long haul to maintain your vision. When I advise presidents of Christian colleges, I say, look, get rid of your departments, have colleges. That's it. Like, get rid of sociology, anthropology, political science, economics, have a social science college, put everyone in it. And I'm like, well, that's pretty radical. It's like, yeah, the next thing you want to abolish those colleges. But the first thing you have to do is do that. And so, like, one of the things that's very impressive to me about LCC is that, like, it passes these tests. The meritocracy test, the department test. It's going to hire generalists. My hope is that eventually we'll hire amateurs instead of people with PhDs, because I think of that as, like, the mark of Cain. And I'm allowed to say that because I have one. Another problem, I think, for classical schools is the problem of what I call wolves in wolves' clothing. And I could name names. I've written on these people. They exist in the K through 12 space, and they will also exist in the higher ed space. And they will people who say we need to diversify the curriculum. And they mean it in several different ways, but the purpose of their argument is always to detach classical education from the civilization from which it rose, right? So why aren't we reading, we're always reading Clausewitz's Art of War, but not Sun Tzu's Art of War. Oh, if you're gonna, like, we need to diversify the curriculum. No, this is about our civilization. Like, I mean, like, if we have to war against those guys, we'll probably read the books. But, like, it's not about other civilizations. It's about where we came from. And that's just a variation of it, because other versions of the wolves in wolves' clothing problem arise from people who say, like, our canon isn't diverse enough. And, like, using representation as the standard for revising how the core at any particular college is arranged. That should never be the argument. The argument should always be, this book accomplishes the goal we want for that class better than the other book. And if my students don't see themselves in that book, anyone who says that, get behind me, Satan. Right? Get behind me, Satan. So in sum, what I would like to just emphasize the ways in which I understand classical education. Is that the quick and dirty way of thinking about higher classical education is enduring questions, Christian answers. It's not the deepest way of understanding it because it doesn't cover everything that we're going to do at a classical school. We're still going to teach Latin. And it's not an enduring question to say, like, what's the word for that? The deeper reason is that in order to understand yourself, you must understand the civilization from which you came. And that our civilization is complex. We have Judaism displaced by the Greeks, the Romans displaced the Greeks, the Christians displaced the Romans, the nation arose amidst when we had the universal church. There's tons of interesting and important developments that explain where we come from and that you can't understand where we are today without knowing. And the languages that were spoken then were Latin and Greek and others, and they're crucial to master if you're going to understand where we came from. So it has never been a mass phenomenon, classical education. It's never been a mass phenomenon. But the effect that bands of people, maybe 2% of people had classical education until 1880, like almost every senator did, almost every representative did, almost every president did, except Andrew Jackson, of course. And they had this preparation. This is what made them elite. This is what made them stand out from their fellow citizens. And I have a feeling that the same thing will happen with LCC. Thank you. So I guess I'm happy to take questions for a little bit. We have a young man up front.
Hello, thank you so much for your talk. I found it very invigorating, as I am the last liberal arts major at Bethany Lutheran College in Mankato, Minnesota. My name is Douglas Lindy, and I really appreciated this. My question for you is, we have this sort of a liberalized, segregated, diversified approach to the liberal arts, and it's infected our colleges. My question for you has it ever happened that a group of students, faculty, people from the outside have been able to exercise a college from going down a diversified path of segregated, single canistered disciplinary approach to education? Is there any way, or have you seen it happen, where colleges can recover from this and return to more of a classical approach? Does it require a complete turnaround? That's my question for you.
Yeah, it's a good question. I get asked that a lot. I've been working in Florida on higher ed stuff, and there's an attempt in Florida to do this right now. So let me answer it in 2 or 3 ways. So one way in which it is happening in many major universities is that they're establishing centers on campus that are supposed to be kind of for classical education. There's one at University of Florida called the Hamilton Center. They're hiring great Renaissance scholars. And when I've talked to the people there, their friends who are developing this, I say, you guys have done an amazing job. You've hired high-end people from high-end universities, no BS on their vitas, they're all serious scholars. This is going to be great. Unprecedented. It could last 10 years. Because there's a whole other university around it that's going to do everything it can to destroy it. And so there has to be kind of an offense-defense thing going on. And the defense has to be pretty aggressive in order to protect yourselves. Almost every one of these centers that have been established at major universities, Stanford, Arizona State, UT Austin is establishing one, Ohio is establishing 4 or 5. It's going to be tough. It's going to be tough, and it's easily co-opted. So that's kind of black pill number 1. I think some Christian schools have really improved. So Dort College, which I think of as not far from here, but it's probably 8 hours from here. in northwest Iowa, in Sioux County. Like, what's that? 11 hours? All right, well, whatever. It's in the West, that's like a neighbor. You can get there in a day, right? Driving, not walking. And I don't know how you'd fly there. Like, that would be interesting, 4 trips. But like, I think they've like become more like selective. That being said, there's a book written by a Notre Dame guy. I never say his name, but it's something like Berktal, but the name of the book is The Dying of the Light, which is just an account of Christian colleges and how they lose their way. Dort is one of those colleges. I think if you went and took like the account of that college in the book and looked at it today, it would be like 20% better. So, I don't know, that's kind of like, that's not quite black pill. Like, they've done some things. They've done some things to make it more missional. And I could talk more about that book. It's a very interesting book. And so, like, those are my 2 answers. Like, the approaches that we have are all within the modern system. They're assuming departments and PhDs. I have a good friend at BYU, Brigham Young University, and he wrote something in First Things maybe 10 years ago. It's like, where do we get our faculty at BYU? Like, we're an elite school. We get them, the Ivy League graduates, Mormons who go to the Ivy League and come back. And when they come back, what are they? Like, they're not Mormons. They're like they're sociologists, or like with like Mormonism on the side. And like, that is a very difficult problem for any higher education institution. Like, I think LCMS seminaries have this problem. Probably they don't produce their own PhDs, so they have to get credentialed by some non-aligned institution. And then you probably have to do some sort of very thorough exam to make sure that they're okay. And if you mess up twice, you're dead. Like, that's the modern university. So it's extremely difficult. I don't know of any examples of universities that have been saved. And I include Hillsdale hasn't been saved. Like, they have a couple really good departments at Hillsdale. That's what they have. We have a young lady up here. We have 2 gentlemen back there.
A common argument I've heard from the wolves and wolves clothing that you have described is that materials from other civilizations have the truth, goodness, and beauty that classical education seeks, and therefore we should avail ourselves of them. How do we argue against them?
Yeah, well, it depends on what classical education is. Like, so I'm pro truth, beauty, and goodness, I guess. I mean, I don't want to be anti those things. So let me sign up for truth, beauty, and goodness. And I'm also pro-human flourishing and all these general things. All right, so don't take what I'm saying with, as opposing beauty or anything like that. The purpose of classical education is to understand your civilization. It's not learning truth, beauty, and goodness generally. It's understanding how these things are captured in our civilization. Like, so I think there's classical education in Chinese. It's filled with error. It's not Christian. It's filled with error. And it's interesting to know that stuff. I'm not opposed to it, but that's like on the side. The central thing is understanding the principles of our civilization. So, I mean, I see it on, or people send me Twitters. I kind of have a Twitter account, but I have someone run it. I never look at it. It's one of my principles of life. I'm not going to let my life go in that way. The people will send me twits from people, and they'll like, oh, look at the books I'm reading. You know, there's this book from India and this book from the Chinese philosophers, and they're like at classical ed people at Pepperdine or Biola, and they're in the Tory school, and I'm like, all right, they're off the list of places I'd send my kid for that. Because like, oh, we're so good at our civilization that we need to go to the others now? Like, to me, it's a solvent, not a genuine attempt to approach truth, beauty, and goodness.
Have you stand up when you ask the question, too.
You say that the purpose of the modern university is both to find new ways to subdue nature and to control man. So my question is, do we have Lutheran answers or philosophies to both of those questions? Are we developing them, or will we let the enemy give us those answers for our children?
Yeah. So I want to take that in two parts. So I said earlier that I'm not opposed to the existence of the research university, but I do think that having some version of what we used to have when we had classical colleges is the way to go when it comes to modern research universities. So just let's separate these universities. We need chemistry. No classical college had chemistry in 1820. Right? We need chemistry. We need PhDs in chemistry. But if you combine these two visions of education, one wins. So I'm not for diversity. Like I already told you, don't listen to anyone who says they're for diversity, but I'd like different kinds of colleges with different kinds of missions. And so that's the first part of my answer, which isn't exactly an answer, because we'd want to evaluate whether or not the goals of those modern universities, controlling nature, or subduing nature and controlling man, are consistent with genuine theological commitments of Christianity. Because I think there's a real rub there. There's a real rub. And I'll try to put this as simply as I can. The vision of what a human being is on the modern university is that we are plastic, infinitely plastic, and can be bent and created with a proper application of levers. Right? Now, no Christian can maintain his faith and embrace that vision. So, this is why when people go get PhDs in social science, they come back corrupt, because they've embraced that vision of what a human being is, which is inconsistent with the principles of human nature having enduring characteristics like sin. So there also has to be, I think, a healthy interaction between the assumptions. It's very difficult to criticize the assumptions of the modern university on the modern university. And if you don't believe me, just look me up on Google. And that's when I start talking about the importance of free speech. Always cynically.
Thank you for your talk. Just following up on that question about separating the sciences from the liberal arts in terms of the universities, how do you propose then that we direct the moral guidance of the sciences if their education is separated?
Yeah, it's going to be an issue. There's no doubt that that's going to be an issue, so this brings up another, I think, another fundamental aspect of the modern research university. Now, we don't use these terms as much as we used to, but when I was going to school, we talked a lot about the fact-value distinction. That science is about facts. This is what happens when you have gas. This is what can happen to the lungs of people when you apply this gas to them. And they die. And then, well, should we apply that gas to people and kill them? That's a value question. We'll have to bring in the ethicist to tell us whether or not we should kill them. And the ethicist will come in and say, well, it depends, or maybe they'll say no, or they'll say, is the person useful, or is the person evil, or something like that. And those would be the sophisticated ones that would kind of raise these questions. And this is just like a long way of saying that, like, on the modern university, like, no one takes value seriously. And I don't think this is a question that can be answered on the level of the university, but has to be answered on the level of a political community. There should be political control over the use of technology, and classically educated people should enter politics and help answer these questions. So I do think, like, there's ways of approaching it, deep questions about how to use technology. Can I illustrate this in a different way? So if Alan Carlson is here. I don't know if he'd call himself classically educated, but for the purposes of this talk, I'm going to say yes, he definitely is classically educated. There's a lot of people who defend the family in the public sphere, and a lot of them defend the family with numbers. Like, if you get married, your chances of being happy increase by 31%. 31% if you're a man, and 28% if you're a woman. If you don't have two dads, you're 38% more likely to commit crime. Or excuse me, if you don't have two parents, two dads. I'm off the board. I'm off the board. If you don't have two parents. Now, I've been reading Heather Has Two Mommies again, and anyways, and so there's all these statistics, but no one is ever persuaded by statistics, because the belief is that human nature is plastic, and we can actually change the institutions to adapt to the malperformance right now. All right? So even though there's ethicists, family scholars that say, well, the family is the cornerstone of a decent civilization, like, you have to prove that with science. And if you're proving it with science, you're already adopting the principle that undermines the proof, the plasticity of man. Dr. Carlson, like, we can talk about every civilization that ever existed and what attributes they have in common by studying the Greeks, the Romans, the development of the Christian family out of the Roman family, and what effects it had on the civilization. Totally different way of making the argument, right? It shows what human beings are capable of, and it doesn't, like, plumb the depths, but it also, it points to some of the heights. And because there's something enduring in those kind of answers. So, like, these things could be melded in some ways, but you can only really defend something like the family with, like, reference to some objective truth that science will never be able to supply. All right, that's my attempt. Oh, we're done. All right, thank you.